All right, well, thank you, everyone. This is our second Harlow Seminar Series talk of the summer. Tonight we have Dan McCoy. Next week we have Randy Haas, who's actually here scoping it out, getting ready. But today we're really excited. We have Dan McCoy. Dan is the director of the Kemmerer, Wyoming Outdoor Recreation, Tourism, and Hospitality Institute, a position he's held since 2022. But Dan's had a lot of roles at the University of Wyoming. He started there in 1999. He was actively involved in managing the university's outdoor program. He also served as the assistant director of campus recreation, and he led and was a major player in the $3.5 million award-winning renovation of half-acre wellness center and gym, and like just a really great spot on campus that I'm sure a lot of the students spend a lot of time in. He joined the Hobbs School in 2017, where he became the degree coordinator for the Outdoor Recreation, Tourism, and Management program, and also was one of the people that helped organize and launch that. And so he has this really deep understanding for Wyoming's working landscapes and the people that support them. He has a really intimate relationship with this region, both the Jackson and the greater Yellowstone area. And we're just really excited to have Dan here to share about all the great things him and his students are doing. So let's give Dan a really big applause.
Well, thanks, Willie. It's a big honor for me to be here as a Harlow speaker. I know Hank Harlow. He's a great guy, and he's had incredible influence over many graduate students over the years, and many of them have been up here conducting research all over the GYE. This is a really incredibly special place, and I just wanted to first start off by saying thank you to the staff here, Willie, who's the station manager, who runs this place, also to Casey and to Charlie, who keep this place running and hopping. It's a really special and important place for the University of Wyoming to have so much research conducted up here and to be able to happen out of this place. And if you're interested in knowing more how you can support it besides just the $10 for the dinner donation, talk to Willie afterwards about a really amazing giant facility that the university is hoping to build up here. Maybe not giant is the right terminology, but it's a big facility that would be transformational for the AMK for generations to come. That would be right here on the property. So, okay, let's see. Let me just make sure that I can click forward here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about balancing the visitor economy in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And as Willie mentioned, I've been fortunate enough as the director of the J. Kemmerer Worth Institute to conduct a lot of research in this area. And tonight, a little bit later on, we're going to pause halfway through because I know listening to a faculty member for a long period of time can sometimes make people sleepy. So we're going to like somewhere halfway through, we're going to pause and have our wonderful graduate students talk who are conducting research in this area, mostly around visitors in this area, and a little bit about the Bridger Teton National Forest. So we'll pause halfway through to talk a little bit about that. So the J. Kemmerer Worth Institute, what is it that we do? A little promotional plug for this briefly. It's really our mission is to expand and diversify Wyoming's economy by supporting the outdoor recreation, tourism, and hospitality industries of the state. And we do that in three distinct ways. We do that through research, workforce development, and statewide engagement. We have about 8 faculty and staff who conduct research and provide workforce training and development, provide internship and employment support for students who are working in the industry. Got just a recent graduate from the Outdoor Recreation and Tourism Management degree who participated in some of the research that as an undergraduate you came out of that, Tom, here with us tonight. So thanks for joining us, Tom. So I think it's important to start with a premise, and maybe some of you will disagree with me here, but I'm hoping by the end of tonight that I'll maybe talk you into, okay, Dan, I kind of see where you're coming from here, but my premise is that I don't think that we're loving this place to death. I think the question here is how we can keep this in balance so ecosystems and communities can both thrive. So my premise is that the visitor economy plays a very important role here for a number of different reasons. And I'm hopefully throughout tonight, you'll kind of hear why that's the case. So before we get into that, I thought we'd just do a short kind of history of visitors to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and kind of start way back and then quickly move to today. But as we know, the indigenous presence in this area been here for thousands of years. 27 tribal nations consider this place to be either home or a place that they've traveled seasonally to hunt, fish, gather, quarry, use the thermal areas. But human presence has always, or for a long period of time, has been part of the ecosystem. So that is a critical piece that I think is important framing for the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. But as we know, during Western expansion, there was a substantial amount of ecological decline that occurred. So there was unregulated hunting, extraction, that many people just thought that the wildlife was just endlessly abundant, and shooting bison from trains just for fun, just massive slaughtering, predator eradication of wolves, mountain lions, beaver, bison, so fur-bearing animals. And I don't know if you heard about this, but birds, certain bird species were actually, their feathers, these lightweight feathers were actually worth more than and traded for more than the cost of gold at the time. So a really incredible thing. And these really incredible hats and other decorations that were really popular all over the US and Europe. So really kind of there was real cause for the taking of all this until there was more regulation with enforcement. But my argument here is that the worst time for species and for wildlife in this area really happened around this time. The ecosystems were way out of balance at this time. And as we also know, even though we hear stories today, right, that somebody put a baby bison in their car and brought it to the ranger because they were worried about it. This was a couple of years ago. Some of us may watch reruns or subscribe to reruns of Yellowstone and watch some of these things that happen. But some of this is a long time ago. Bears were kind of used as a form of entertainment. They would put these are actually our national parks that would put out trash for entertainment for the visitors that would come here. And this is a historic photo of a lunch counter for bears where trash was put out for the entertainment of visitors. Right. And now that's not necessarily, the hand feeding or begging for the roadside. All of these historic photos were just bears as kind of a form of entertainment. But obviously, that shifted in the 60s and 70s. Bear-proof stuff kind of arrived, and we kind of treated bears a little bit different. So let's fast forward a little bit through a couple different decades of time because we keep this on track. And where are we at today? Well, Yellowstone almost eclipsed about 5 million visitors. In Grand Teton National Park last year, almost 4. And what we're also seeing with visitation is that changes that we're seeing more people earlier on, and we're also seeing people kind of sticking around a little bit later as well. But if you kind of look back through time, there are obviously big times of increases or decreases during World War II. But, there are often times where we've got record-breaking years are not new. This record-breaking years have been happening for a long time now, but they continue to happen. And obviously, this big precipitous decline and spike, we're going to talk a little bit about that later, but that spike was right around 2021 during COVID, and it caused some massive disruptions. And I'm sure for those of you who live in this area, you probably experienced many of those. So I would say right now that the GYE is fundamentally healthy, but there's some lingering issues, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's one of the largest, nearly intact temperate ecosystems in the Northern Hemisphere. About 75% of the land is public and protected, and about 25% of it is privately held. There's been substantial improvements in grizzly bear recovery, reductions in invasive species that have, like the predatory lake trout, and the restoration of wolves. And all of these things, I would argue, is that because of the American interest in these in this area, in these things, because people have visited this place and said, "Wow, this place is amazing. It's special," right? Like many of you, they've seen these things and they've argued that, and federally, changes have occurred to enact protections and things for these species to make many of these things happen. And also, one other thing I want to just mention is that, you know, a lot of the research that's been conducted on some of these things has come out of stuff that's happened for the people who stay here as well. So the other thing, but there's a lot of challenges, as we know, right? There's climate change. There's also more people moving into this area and putting up fences and dividing up land that breaks up migrating wildlife corridors. There's invasive species that are a major issue. My wife and I were just hiking today, and there were not that many, but there were a couple Canada thistles that were out there. But lake trout is certainly an issue, and obviously wildlife disease. Chronic wasting disease has been detected and found over in the elk feeding ground area. So that's a major issue. But what I would argue is that these things, it's not fair to put this all on visitors. This is not visitors, spreading wildlife disease necessarily. It's not visitors that are solely, if we swung the proverbial gates and didn't allow any visitation to this area whatsoever, it still wouldn't turn back things like climate change. So I guess what I'm trying to argue here is just let's give our visitors a little bit of not too much of a hard time here. Although they do, there's some. We'll talk about some of the challenges too here in a minute. Okay, so what does the visitor economy mean for Wyoming? These numbers come from the Wyoming Office of Tourism. It's the second largest industry in the state, about $5 billion generated last year. 8.7 million visitors to the entire state of Wyoming. 33,000 jobs. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but it makes it the largest private employment sector in the state of Wyoming. So that's a big number. That's a lot of jobs. It generates a lot of state and local tax, and most of our visitors from the state are coming from outside of the state, about 75%. And just in Teton County alone, it's actually the county that has the most amount of visitation of any of the other counties. It generates the most amount of revenue compared to all the other counties in the state of Wyoming. And the second closest being, I believe, either Park County or Laramie County in the southeast corner of the state. Park County is up by Hope. Okay, so a few more stats on who visits Wyoming. And these are also coming from a Wyoming visitor profile study that was done a couple of years ago for the state of the Wyoming Office of Tourism. But they're really coming for vacation and leisure. If you're forced into this question, if I'm coming for vacation or visiting national parks, 62% chose vacation, 38% chose state or national parks. Most of them are repeat visitors, and the average trips taken, this is back in 2023, the last time the study was conducted, was about 2.3 trips. So they're coming often. This is not their first time, and they're doing multiple trips. Now, what are they doing while they're here? Well, the things that they participated in, scenic drives, visiting state or national parks, wildlife viewing, those are the things that most of our visitors are doing. And what are the top drivers for the visit? Well, visiting national, these are the things that influence their decision to visit, are visiting state or national parks, scenic drives, wildlife viewing, fishing, shopping showed up there as one of the top things. Hasn't really been my experience, but I'm originally from New York City. Please don't hold that against me, but shopping's a little better there, depending upon what you're looking for. Okay, so let's now kind of go back to that really big spike that we saw in national park visitation, right? That was right around the time that the highest levels of visitation, people were flocking to this area. The Bridger Teton National Forest had no way to figure out how to calculate campground occupancy, because I think, Lindsay, the campground occupancy was somewhere in like 125 or 150% of occupancy. They're just, people flooded campgrounds. It was overwhelmed. The valley was just inundated with people. And the infrastructure really wasn't ready for it. Trailheads just blew up. There was just way more traffic, strained EMS. It was overflowing facilities. And really at this time, we were managing for marketing and arrivals, less so for destination coordination and stewardship. And that's where I want to kind of share a really important example with you. The Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board back in 2023 spent a little bit over a year working with a number of different stakeholders, focus groups, and survey respondents to develop a framework and a plan to help address some of these issues that were happening and develop the sustainable destination management plan. And I'll just mention briefly, and I'll be sharing some of the research that we do to help support the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board in monitoring visitors, their impacts, and also residents and how they're feeling and so forth. So, okay, so before I share with you some of that research, I just want to explain to you one statistical tool that we use for both visitors and for residents. It's called the Importance Performance Analysis, or IPA. And it's a diagnostic tool that basically kind of asks questions: how important is this to you? And how is the destination perform, or how are the destination, or how is my community performing on these things? Does that make sense? So up here in this quadrant, if this is a really high important thing to you, but the destination or your community is doing low on performance, like, hey, this traffic stinks, it's terrible, we're not doing very well. These are the things we can organize all of these things on a scale into concentrate here. This quadrant over here, when you measure it, it says keep up the good work. These are the things that the destination or your community is doing well. So these are the things where importance is high and performance is high. And then these ones on the bottom are where performance are low and importance are low, and overkill is where importance is low but the performance is high. So my first question to you, to try to get a little bit of audience interaction, what do you think visitors report on in terms of concentrate here? What do you think visitors are telling us about the destination? The things that they care the most about, but the destination's not performing very well. Parking, okay. Nice.
Restrooms.
Okay, what else? Traffic, okay. Anything else? You guys got at least one of those on there.
Cost.
Cost, yes. All right, great. There was actually very few things that, these are the only three things that really kind of popped up in this area. Was price, value for money, and parking were the three things that visitors really felt that that the destination was not doing very well at. And but look at this long list of things that keep up the good work or overkill. There's just an amazing amount of things over here. Unique character or feel or authenticity. When you're walking around the streets of Jackson, right, you get the boardwalks, maybe even riding in the shootouts, or all those things that you might kind of normally associate with a Western place. Pristine environment, sense of adventure, feeling of wildness, authentic history and culture, friendliness of residents. I mean, the list goes on here. So just a really amazing job that visitors report. And then as we look at the positive visitor experiences, we also have those that 92% of Teton County visitors reported somewhat or very satisfied with their experience. And even at Old Faithful, a study back in 2018, and you guys have all seen the photos, right? And especially in the summer of 2018, 91% at Old Faithful said their experience was great. We're having a good time. This is not crowds, all this traffic. None of this stuff is really a big deal for us. We're having a great time. Okay, so what do you think residents say on this scale?
Nice.
What's the concentrate here things for residents? Housing, okay. Traffic, yes, nailed it. What else?
Cost of living.
Cost of living, yep. Yeah, they actually wound up. Woo! Here is the bitter IPA. Yeah, maybe a little bit too many hops in this one. This is residents. Really, this is a resident sentiment survey that we did just a couple of years ago. But managing traffic, managing tourism's negative impacts, limiting the environmental impacts of travel and tourism, and then some other interesting things like providing ways for Teton County to use funds generated from tourism to mitigate impacts and to improve the community, building a thriving community. But there are also things that they're doing that residents reported that they're doing well, limiting litter, providing public infrastructure, the protection and conservation of natural resources. So there were a fairly good list of things where they reported that residents reported that they're doing well. Now, obviously, and residents also picked up on the fact that the economic impact is really positive, but there's impacts to residents' quality of life from the so many visitors who are coming here. And I think the Travel and Tourism Board really took this to heart. Lindsay here is the destination management coordinator from the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board. So the great thing about much of this work right here is that they're taking this to heart. They're thinking about this. They're working on this with the Destination Stewardship Council to figure out ways to kind of ameliorate, mitigate these types of these tensions. Okay, almost done here. We're gonna turn it over to the students for a few minutes to make it way more exciting. Resident sentiment surveys. There's a really common question that we always ask residents that is, do the benefits outweigh the negative drawbacks from tourism? And as we look at Western Gateway communities, Jackson is kind of average in terms of either agree or strongly agree. So only 36% either agree or strongly agree that the positives outweigh the negatives. And other communities like Moab and Lake Tahoe score a lot lower. Sun Valley, Park City, a little bit higher. But these are all communities that have a lot of pressure, and residents feel that. Montana's Yellowstone country is similar. That's 3 points. I didn't normalize the scales here, but 3.77 is just below an agree. So it's kind of on the neutral side, but this is it's a little bit more negative as well. This is in the region for Montana that's closest to Yellowstone. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to graduate students for a few minutes. These are all graduate students that are either currently working with me or just recently graduated, and I just thought they would come and present some of their research that's related to this. So I'll turn it over first to John. So sweet. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jono, and I just finished my master's degree in May, working up in Montana now. But I worked with Dan for my project, and I did a Plan B, so it wasn't so much of a thesis-based project. But I kind of had the idea to work with the Friends of Bridger Teton due to a capstone course that I took with my project or my program. And I was so angered by the current Doge layoffs that were happening back in 2025 that I contacted Jennifer Recupero, who I was working with from Friends of Bridger Teton. It's like, how do we make a change? How do we make better stewards for public lands? And she brought up that the main difference between the national forest and the national parks is that there's no entrance gate. People don't have someone to talk to. They don't understand what it takes to manage these lands. So that information I went through and I decided, how can you translate complex and heavy management terms into something that the public can actually act on? So I did a brief literature review on public trust and perception of Forest Service management and created an interactive story map. So my background for undergrad was in geography. I also completed a graduate GIS certificate with my program. And this story map had 11 sections, 4 map tours, slideshows, and historical overlays. So we kind of broke down, what is the Forest Service? What are the management directives? What's the history of the Forest Service? What's the history of the BT? And then we kind of build it up from there. So what is a ranger district? Learn about your ranger districts. What are your facilities? What does it take to manage these facilities? Who are the people working here? What are the benefits to the community? So it's really an education tool because the facts of what it takes to run a national forest are scattered few and far between on their website to find. So with having this tool that lives actively on the Friends of Bridger Teton's website, recreators and people interested in making a change can actually see, what it takes to run our public lands and why it's important to be engaged and really defend our forest resources.
Hey, my name is Corinne. I'm also one of Dan's grad students. And for my project, I also worked with Friends of the Bridger Teton. Something that was very personal to me coming to Wyoming, moving here, is I had visited in the past and had spent a lot of time designated dispersed camping outside of Grand Teton and in Bridger Teton National Forest. And I'm originally from Georgia, and I got back home and it was not really something that the National Forests were doing in the same way. And I thought it was really interesting. And I started to realize that in Wyoming, designated dispersed camping is something that's being done very well, or it's very popular here. And it's done in a very specific way that a lot of other forests don't do. So I sat down with Dan, he connected me with Friends of the Bridger Teton, and we came up with a way to kind of look deeper into this designated dispersed camping that this forest is probably, we think they're doing really well on it, but we're not sure. There's not a lot of research out here about it right now. So my project really centers around, why do people choose these free first come first serve sites, and are they actually getting the experience that they want to once they get out on the forest and they start camping? So I'm actually really thankful that Dan kind of preempted the IPA for me a little bit, because that's a big part of what my survey is about. Picking these campsite attributes and qualities and asking people, is this important to you when choosing a campsite? And is it actually, is Bridger Teton performing well on it? Or are there things that, you might be looking for that aren't in your campsite? And then as well as just general questions about would you come back? Would you recommend this to somebody else? Is there something that stood out about your experience that you want to share with the Forest Service? So yeah, this is framed by the theory of planned behavior, as you can see on the slide. And yeah, I think it's very important. I see a lot of people come through these sites, and I see a lot of people turn around at specific sites because there's not a lot of availability. And a lot of people say that, I looked it up on Instagram and it looked really pretty, and that's how I ended up here. So kind of figuring out where people are getting this information from, whether or not they're getting the experience you want or they want it. And at the end of the day, if this is something that other national forests could benefit from implementing and improve their visitor experience, or if it's something that might not be working as well as we think, and it's something that the Forest Service should explore a little bit more. So thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Jennifer Bouts, but also just Jenny Bouts. Yeah, my project is similar in the sense that I'm leaning on IPA and a little bit different. I've got a different project partner. So if you're local, you'll know the name Friends of Pathways, and they are best known for their work building paved bike paths that connect locations all the way from Wilson to Jackson, or from Jackson up to the park. But they also have a separate type of work that they're doing that is a little bit less known by their name, and they partner with the Forest Service pretty heavily to help them make up the work that the Forest Service doesn't have the resources to, be that staff shortages or funding shortages. So in addition to those paved bike paths that they're famous for, they also have trail crews that they hire every summer to go do maintenance on different Forest Service trails, or they're installing information kiosks at trailheads, or they're putting up bathrooms, or even just refilling the toilet paper in those bathrooms, because somebody has to do it and the Forest Service can't always get to it. So my project this summer is going to some of those trailheads that Friends of Pathways has adopted for the Forest Service and helping them prioritize maintenance items at those trailheads. And I'm using IPA, and eventually at the end of the summer, I'll have different aspects of trails and trailheads sorted into those boxes, and that will go to a report that Friends of Pathways uses to prioritize where they're going to spend their money, resources, and time improving Forest Service trailheads and trail systems. There is a second portion of this where I'm also collecting visitor spending data at these Forest Service trails, and that will go into an economic impact analysis of Forest Service trails in Teton County, which helps Friends of Pathways continue getting funding from the destination marketing organizations to keep maintaining those Forest Service trails. So it's going to be really beneficial for both locals and visitors, because the locals are actually more heavy users based on what I've seen of these trails. So I'm doing in-person intercept surveys at these trailheads and talking to a lot of locals actually about what they want to see here, and then a couple visitors sprinkled in there. Hopefully we'll see more in July. Yeah, and why this matters, it tackles the maintenance backlog, which anyone that's been on a Forest Service trail, I'm sure you can think of something that could use a little bit of love and attention. Forest Service is underserved or underfunded and underappreciated in probably everywhere. Definitely in Wyoming and in the Bridger Teton. Yeah.
All right, last student, you made it, almost there. Well, my name is Bianca Walder. I'm originally from New Jersey, but this is my 4th summer working here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I worked for Grand Teton as an AMK intern in 2023, and then I was a ranger at Old Faithful. So I have a lot of experience with dealing with a lot of visitors. That being said, my study, very similar to Jenny, also working with Friends of Pathways. There's not a lot of understanding about the visitors or the folks who are using the pathway. So everybody, cyclists, runners, folks using adaptive cycles, strollers, rollerbladers, everyone. I'm doing an intercept study out on the pathways in Grand Teton National Park. Also using the importance performance analysis to try to understand what people value and what the park is doing well and where there's some misalignment. So this data will be useful not only for me in my thesis, but for the park, for Friends of Pathways, and hopefully to understand some demographic trends to see like maybe certain demographics, certain user groups prefer one thing and the cyclists prefer something else, or what have you. So that will be super interesting. So if you see me out on the trail, make sure to say hello. I'll have a bright orange safety vest. So yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Great. Yeah, and please, if you guys do see them this summer, please do take their surveys. It helps us out a lot. So thank you guys. Okay, just a couple more slides to wrap us up here. I want to kind of now pivot a little bit to talk about just how we're monitoring tourism in this area. And we're using indicators to kind of help drive our understanding, and picking out those indicators that might that include things like social indicators, like we've seen earlier, in terms of resident perceptions and visitor perceptions. But we're also looking at environmental indicators and economic indicators as well. So how do we pick which indicators that we're kind of monitoring for visitors here, specifically in Teton County? Well, the way that we went about doing that is by organizing a Delphi study that looked at experts as a structured approach to kind of get to understand a specific set of things, and which indicators really, in this case, which indicators really matter the most. And we were thinking, my hypothesis going into this study that we did this past fall was that we'd probably like winnow down, Lindsay and I were trying to figure this out. I don't know, it was like something, I think we had started with somewhere in the ballpark of about 60-ish indicators, 64 indicators. So that's, yeah. Bianca worked on this as well, but we wound up adding more indicators to this list. I think we got up to like 70.
82.
82, okay. Yeah, a lot more indicators. But we've been organizing these on a sustainable destination dashboard that you guys can actually go to on the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism's website. Bianca has been on there uploading all of these data from various sources like start bus ridership or average daily traffic going over Teton Pass on 22 just east of Wilson. And for example, I'll just point out on this one little piece of data from 2024, the average daily traffic over Teton Pass down into Wilson, it's about 10,000 cars a day. And that's year round. So that's not, again, my premise, it's not the visitors here who are always the problem. It's people who don't have housing within Teton County who need to live on the other side of the valley. I'd also argue that the peak in the summertime here when it gets over just 15,000 cars is that some of that is also construction traffic that are coming over here to work on the various construction projects that can happen in the summer. So while visitors get the brunt of, there is a conga line, of course, coming in, the dinner conga line that you guys will probably, if you're going back into Jackson tonight, coming from the parks, going into Jackson, there is a long line of traffic there, absolutely. But this 10,000 average per day is mostly driven by the fact that there isn't housing over here for most of the workforce. So I'll just mention that you guys are welcome to jump on there and see all these different things for transportation, electricity, fuel, waste, and water. These are just the environmental ones. We also have social and economic. So this is a complex story to try to tell through these indicators because no individual indicator is really caused by visitors alone. Housing, wildlife mortality, water quality. Is water quality more of a function of the county not enforcing the septic system, enforcing septic systems that are out of compliance? When we start getting down in the weeds in some of these indicators, it's difficult to really determine where visitors are really making those impacts. But what we do know is that there is a robust economy, there is a relatively healthy environment, and there's a relatively positive visitor experience. Where the pressures really occur are on residents around housing, traffic, and how residents are feeling in terms of their lives being impacted. And we rolled all this up into an indicator report and provided this to the Jackson Hole Travel and Tourism Board as part of their Sustainable Destination Management Plan, and basically provided guidance and ideas, recommendations, and also kind of like there's a lot to celebrate. There's a lot that's been done that's very positive that the Jackson Hole about the visitor economy and a lot of things that are going very well. So I think that's an important thing. So this is the last thing I'm going to leave you with. This is my last slide. And this is an analogy that comes from Berkeley Young with Young Strategies. He's a tourism expert. He's worked all over the country in destinations big and small. And I'm borrowing this from him. But if you're driving down the road in your car and you're looking at your dashboard and you're looking at your engine temperature, right? But if you're running your car too hot, this is the same type of analogy. You're running it too hot, visitation where it really outruns capacity, it degrades resources, overwhelms communities, and you have a diminished visitor experience and a high impact on residents. We don't want to be there, right? We also don't want to be too cold. The proverbial let's swing the gates in Teton County and just expect people to throw money over the gates, right? That's where the economy stalls. Possibly people are going to care less about this place if people aren't actually coming here and enjoying it and wanting to argue for its protection. But we have to have the housing, the transit facilities, the staffing, the stewardship. The investment must follow the visitation and not lag a decade behind. I'll just close with a quote that I'm hoping I'm not butchering too much. I just heard Chip say this. We just heard this last week. His premise is that we're not loving these places to death, that we need more people to love these places more. So that's all I have for you. So Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions as long as you now agree with my premise. Yes.
I think one of the students talked about the pathway that goes from Jackson all the way to Jenny Lake.
Yeah.
That's really great for this valley.
Yeah.
There's one problem with it. Park Service closes it, I believe, on November 1st, and they don't open till May 31st.
Mhm.
This year, they could have been riding in on March and April.
Mm.
And those bicyclists get out on the highway, and it's perfectly clear over there on it. There might be a snowdrift or two. It's dangerous as heck. Because if you see some of these tourists stopping in the middle of the road, they're not looking at what's down the road. There's gonna be some death
Yeah.
in those off seasons. We need to get that open when it's viable to go up and down those paths.
Yeah. Bianca, do you have anything to?
I guess I'll stand. Yeah, so the reason it's closed is because of elk migration. So as you know, all the.
That's bullshit. Because it doesn't matter whether you're over here 25 feet or on the highway. On a
That's the
bicycle.
problem.
It doesn't, it's bullshit. I'm sorry. I should have said that. I know it's the reason, but it's not right.
Yeah, this is absolutely something that you should bring up to the parks. It's at the end of the day, it's the park's decision when to open and close the pathways.
And then
I got
after
the same answer.
it's the elk refuge also.
And they have a certain mission. It's not bicyclists.
Yeah, but the elk refuge is only for their fishing. Well, I'm
Anyway,
sorry.
thank you for.
Yeah.
Need to take a survey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this is somewhat related to that. I didn't really hear you talk about wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
I've been here a long time, many people have.
Yeah.
Wilderness seems a basic value of this area, but it keeps getting chipped away.
Mm.
And, you know, the elk refuge, their mission is not primarily recreation.
Sure.
But we have huge problems with Targhee, with the village and Snow King that feel entitled to expand out of their boundaries and to have things that could be anywhere, you know, jump lines, all this stuff that's like a circus. And that's a big draw for people. But a lot of residents are not in favor of that. A lot of residents going way back feel like wilderness values are very important. I mean, e-bikes on the pass was a controversy. Where does wilderness fit in?
Well, wilderness is certainly, I mean, from a visitor economy perspective, it's certainly, you know, one of the things that draws people here, right? That's certainly a thing. The other thing I would probably mention is that as we saw in terms of visitor motivation and desire to, I mean, it's the scenic value, it's the wildlife and so forth. And I don't have numbers on the number of people who are actually going to like specific wilderness area, like capital W, like where, you know, the idea that was founded here in the valley. I mean, that there's such an incredible history to like the creation of like the Wilderness Act and the Bonnies. I mean, that whole thing is, I mean, there's just such an amazing piece right here in the valley. Motivate from a visitor perspective, I would say wilderness is a little bit less of it's one of those ideas that's a little bit far and difficult for them to kind of really understand, because there's of course de facto or de jure, and I teach that in my class, and hopefully Tom remembers that from a while back, or at least one of his classes, to understand the difference between the different types of wildernesses. But from a visitor motivation, I think it's just because this place is so wild and kind of the ecosystem is relatively intact. That's a major motivation for people to come here. And I think maybe what would help for wilderness protection would be for more people to kind of understand what that actually means, because it's a little bit more distant for your average visitor, for the 8 million some odd visitors who come here. It's a little bit more difficult for them to wrap their heads around what that is. This what would be my guess. Yeah.
And I could agree with a lot of that, but I think there's tremendous pressure coming down from the administration into Department of Interior and Agriculture to just blow the doors open. And a lot of tourism stuff, and especially the Recreation Act in Wyoming, there's a high chance of that blowing doors open when the wilderness and the wildlife, that it makes them taken for granted when they're all in a very vulnerable position.
Sure. Yeah. Just right behind you. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I'll be fast.
Yeah.
I understand that your program is about tourism,
Mhm.
right? You want to know what's the nature of tourism and what's the impact on the land and stuff.
Yeah.
But like you brought out, there's a bigger picture about what is all this public land for?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the history of the national parks, especially here at Teton, is to ensure that we have a place for the public to go, so the people's enjoyment.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of flipped that, and now it's become sort of a wildlife preserve, or maybe it's a wilderness, or maybe it's something else that's to be expanded. And I wonder if your program deals with that issue about the morphing of the original intent of the park or public lands in general, because we seem to have a lot of uncertainty on the part of the public about what is the purpose of the national forest, what is the purpose of the park, and what should we do to set our expectations. You guys, this is the closest I've seen to an organization we can kind of do.
Well, that's a really interesting observation. One of the Chip Jenkins a few years ago, he does these visitor use monitoring and management he brings a bunch of us together to kind of talk about issues. For example, in Grand Teton National Park, one of the slides he put up a couple of years ago, Lindsay, were you at this one where we were at the visitor center? One of the ones that I didn't have time for and I didn't track it down was looking at visitation to Grand Teton National Park, and the numbers go right, like we saw on that earlier slide, and the number of rooms or places that you could stay in Grand Teton National Park, which is it's flat. I mean, there's no change. I mean, here's visitation, and the same since 1960 or so, I can't remember exactly when it was. There has been literally no change to the number of places. So, and I mean, I'm not going to get into it of whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, Chip was very clear that, look, these are the numbers and these are the facts. But what that means is that all those additional visitors have to go outside of the park, and it puts pressure on other, the community of Jackson, right? That's the conga line that goes down to go for dinner, because there's very limited visitor services. There are visitor services in all the parks, right? But the likelihood of expanding those visitor services, the likelihood of expanding those additional campgrounds or hotels, that's just not going to happen. It's not part of what they're doing. So there creates this tension, right? And it puts pressure on outside communities, but it's also kind of a lot of those communities turn it into a business opportunity, right? We're going to build more hotels. We're going to, have more restaurants, and arguably residents benefit from all those restaurants that otherwise wouldn't be able to stay open. I love going to all the different restaurant choices in Jackson when I come up here, because I don't have those same opportunities in Laramie as much. There are some good ones there, but that's the challenge. The challenge is those visitors and the visitor services aren't going to change in the parks. But you're right. There's also for the enjoyment, but what's the other part of the mission is, I don't have the Park Service's mission. Preservation, right. So how do you, for the enjoyment, but preservation, so there's this tension. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I have kind of been on the inside of the national park and forest. In the national park, you just said it, it's supposed to be about preservation for future generations to enjoy. And I think we've kind of forgotten that. One example of that Ben's talking about is we did all these surveys about the Moose Wilson Road and the bike path along the Moose Wilson Road, and the community and Grand Teton National Park said, we're not gonna build that. It goes over an archaeological site. It's gonna cause disturbance for the bears. They kill the bears there in the fall. And then, after making that decision 2 years ago, and we all voted, the park said, no, we're not gonna build it. Then down from the administration comes this thing, we're building the path because they're making the national parks not about preservation, but about recreation. They really changed the whole thing, and the Forest Service very complex because it's not about preservation, it's multi-use. So it's wood, it's oil, it's gas, it's grazing, it's also recreation. So they have a really complex mission. So and oh gosh, the people staying in the park, you know how you say they haven't built any more things? It used to be when you were a concession for a national park, it was written in there. There was like a law. You had to make it affordable for like a family. And about 3 years ago, that went out the window. So it's hundreds of dollars. So the people staying in the park, you have to be wealthy. And I find that a travesty that a family can't really stay in the park and they're forced to go out. So anyway, those are my things.
Yeah.
Oh, and one question I have for you.
Yes.
Tourism is the number one money.
No, it's number two.
It's
the number one and largest private employment sector in the state.
Okay, is number one still like
oil, gas, energy? Yeah, just I mean, energy writ large. Yeah.
Where does agriculture come down? I thought it was number
It's a
two.
distant third.
It's distant to tourism.
Agriculture. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to grow stuff.
Well, you can grow beans.
Yeah, when there's not a lot of precipitation. Yeah,
and a lot of rocks.
And a lot of rocks. Yeah.
That's why we grow cows.
Yeah.
In the back. Yeah.
You know, we were just talking. We were walking in, and we've been in an environment like this in Colorado. Is there a capacity to the number? And I know when you talk about the hotel rooms and the campsites, it's been steady and visitation's gone up. So then you've got people staying farther and farther. Airbnb, all these things have come on board in the last 20 years. Who's determined the capacity, and will they say, okay, you know, doors closed today?
Well, they've been, as you may or may not have heard, there has been kind of some experimenting with that at national parks. So, for example, like Arches National Park had a timed entry system. After a certain number of vehicles that showed up, then they stopped allowing it, and then they opened up again later on in the day. But those are kind of, and then Yosemite did a similar thing, and then Zion's moved to like public transportation for the most part, except for people who were driving into or through the park to go to the concessions that have lodging. So there are some experiments with some of that, but just in terms of like the entire landscape here, like in terms of a carrying capacity, well, I guess I would go back to this. And if you were to drop today's visitation back in 1960, right? I mean, just imagine the overload on the infrastructure and the things at the time. There's just no way that the infrastructure at the time could have handled it. And maybe I'm not arguing that we need to build 4-lane roads right in Great Teton National Park someday to accommodate the number of visitors. That might not be the right balance to strike here. But I think when we start running the engine a little bit too hot, there's too many people. But then, as we've seen from visitor surveys, the costs start going up, and maybe people start choosing other locations. And one of the things that I'll just kind of mention that one of the things that the Wyoming Office of Tourism is really leaning into right now is how do we spread out this visitation to other communities when places like this get too much pressure, and how do we kind of look to those other communities? And there's been actually a lot of work to talk about like maybe having people like learn about the Tribal Buffalo Initiative and going down to visit Jason Valdez and kind of going over to Lander because they've got an amazing food scene, and and because you just can't afford to maybe spend more than maybe you spend one night up here and have an amazing experience, and then you go to a different location. There's a lot of communities in Wyoming that would love those visitor dollars. And if they, people want to come up here and make it a bucket list trip, they might just not spend as many nights here because they can't afford it, and then they go to other locations. So maybe that's the thing that it's the market, the free market that decides. Yeah.
I wondered if you could share with us maybe what's next, like what's a project or some research that you are going to start soon?
Yeah.
Get into?
Yeah, the movement of visitors, working with the Wyoming Office of Tourism, I think is like a really exciting thing for us, because there's so much of an opportunity to figure out how to do this is not what we will be doing is like the live demand, like too much, the capacity is overflowing, visitor sentiment is getting really negative. We need to move visitors to someplace else. But we want to really help the Wyoming Office of Tourism with research and figuring out when those pressures exceed capacity, how can we then move people to other locations. The other thing that I think is a persistent issue from I didn't really talk about today, but a workforce training and development thing is how do we welcome all these visitors to these areas? Western hospitality is a thing that we really focus on in terms of training and professional development for people who work with frontline visitors and helping them to kind of understand, who we are and especially when we have J-1B visa, temporary workers who come into the country, we need to provide those training opportunities. We actually just rolled out a training course called JH Pro that is for frontline hospitality workers that talks all about sustainability, the frequently asked questions of visitors. And we have 60, I think, people signed up for it right now. And we're hoping, we should have 600 over the next year that go in and through this course. You get a really cool certificate and go down to the Jackson Hole Chamber of Commerce and get a little ask me about Jackson Hole kind of thing. So I think we really want to continue to elevate the experience for our guests. And we want to figure out how we can kind of ameliorate some of these issues that come from too much pressure on the resources. So, yeah.
I think you've got a contradiction in the data, or it should be rationalized in that people say it's too expensive, but they come 2.3 times.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
To me, that's everyone whines about cost, but they come 2.3 times.
Yeah.
Maybe you should raise prices.
Yeah. Well, they have been.
Raise prices.
Yeah.
See if it goes to 2.2.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's for the entire state of Wyoming. So I don't know if people are coming to this specific, maybe they are coming to this specific area that frequently, but I won't tell you which hotel it was. It was kind of a mid-range hotel in Jackson. They wanted to charge me $1,000 a night for staying there. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. As a faculty member at a university, that's really kind of expensive. So I don't think it was on a personal trip that I'm going to spend too many nights there when it's that expensive. But people they love it. They come back, they continue to come back, but it might not. That was for the entire state of Wyoming. I don't know about. Do we have data on people come? We do actually have data on how many people come to Jackson. It's not their first trip. I can't remember. Remember that, Lindsay?
I don't.
Yeah.
Well, visitors to Grand Teton, first-time visitors, is around 60%.
Yeah.
So we could probably check that.
Yeah.
And I just had a
comment.
So one thing I just want to notice about the travel tours where we're really looking for next. There's a lot of new things we want to do, but we also want to read some stuff, see how effective our methods are. Right. So instead of always trying to think of what's that's super exciting, we're also trying to say, okay, we're 2 years in, let's do another resident sentiment survey and see what the perceptions are now after we've done a lot of work to try to help alleviate some of those challenges. And I have one other comment I just want to make on the question about the purposes for Grand Teton National Park and then the comment on the Forest Service. So this is something, so I work for travel tourism, but I just, as a personal resident here, wanted to go camping once, somewhere between here and Lander. And I could not for the life of me figure out what the regulations were going to be based on where it's going to go because I didn't have it planned out. So I like to do these fun little games. I thought, well, how many different land management agencies and how many different private property versus public entities. Am I passing through on a 3-hour drive from here to go to school? Okay. So try to do this on your own to figure it out. So you're starting in Town Square on public land, and you're driving on the highway, you're going through the National Elk Refuge, you're going past the fish hatchery. Then you get into Grand Teton National Park. Then you're in Bridger Teton National Park. These things, by the way, are not labeled as you're going through that necessarily, right? So this is asking a lot more residents, let alone tourists. You get into Du Bois, you're going back to public land. Now you're into BLM land, which isn't been showing anywhere. You go back into Forest Service land, you go into the reservation, you go into public land lander, and then you're into the park. So like in terms of trying to figure out like how all of these, each of them have their own mandates for how they're supposed to be managed and what their purposes are. But yet the wildlife don't know that either. Right? So like this is like, we're so fortunate to have so much public land around here, but it makes it really confusing and challenging for men.
Do you, or any other, we need to wrap it up. Yeah.
Oh.
Or are you gonna, I thought you were gonna tell me.
No,
Okay.
Question, are you trying in any way to capture people who cannot come here because of financial barriers?
Ooh, that's a good question. We have not done that. Yeah, we have not done that yet. Yeah.
But a lot of people do camp for free and more and more. I mean, that started right after COVID. They started having these, signs like if you can't find a place to camp, these are the places you can go. And then they started making them more, numbering the sites on Shadow Mountain when they used to be a free for all.
It's a free for all.
Yeah. So that there is still totally free if you can find a spot.
You can. And what's the limit? Is it 7 days? 5 nights. 5 nights on those days. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we didn't ask any questions related to financial means, or did you select this site because it was too expensive to get a hotel in Jackson?
No, I have had a lot of people. I have an open-ended comment section where I'm like, you can literally say whatever that you want. And a lot of people do praise the designated dispersed sites for college students who drove here from out of state. It was the only way we could see this part of the country. There is a lot of.
But it fills up.
It does. And every day I go up there and there's people just parked on the side of the road camping. We're like literally right in front of the X through the tent. There's people set up camping and people don't respect the boundaries.
I noticed that the park has a lot of their signs. No overnight sleeping in your vehicle. Cannot spend the night here. And then when you go backpacking, they want to know where are you going to park, and they want to know your license plate number so that they can go along and say these cars don't belong here.
Yeah.
It's becoming like you can't park anywhere outside of the Forest Service areas.
Maybe just a question or two more, but yeah, Lindsay, did you?
No, I was just going to respond to the Forest Service Center does get the question of what is the cheapest place for me to stay in the summer as one of the most common questions that they get. And a lot of people are staying further away in Du Bois. There's some great lodging, relatively inexpensive lodging in Du Bois, down in Alpine, over in Victor, over in Driggs. But then you see the impact of that is adding to where Davis is coming in and going out. So that's where you're seeing even more lines of traffic. So it's not just the residents. Now it's the visitors who are commuting in and out because of expense. So we do have some data on that.
Any last question before we wrap it up? Yeah.
Do you have actual quantitative data about the tourists who come in the park and then leave at night? I was in Jackson when my friend said, come up to the top tonight. So I hurried up and my dear husband, and we were fortunate enough to have clear sailing because we're going the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very long from Antelope Flats going down the town. So we thought, where are all these cars parked? Not just to mention where other people stay, but is that, and what you guys have observed in your research and such, an issue as well? Because when people go to Jackson at night, they each have cars. Where do those cars go?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, the park. Yeah, the park has done multiple traffic studies, and they're conducting another one this summer. So they do have a lot of data on where people are coming from, where they're going, how they're moving through the park, so that's pretty well researched. Yeah, I don't have that on the top of off the top of my head. I don't know, but I do know a lot of people have to leave the park because there's no place for them to stay overnight. So yeah.
I have a question. On one of your slides, you showed that
I think it was Sun Valley.
Mm, yeah.
The locals are more accepting of the increased tourism where.
Yeah, they feel the benefit. They feel there are more people who feel that the benefits outweigh the negative impact. Yeah. Huh?
Do you know what is causing that difference, and why are people in Sun Valley more feel like they're benefiting from it more than they're being hurt by it, and why Moab? And I understand that here we're in the middle. So is there something that we could learn from the experience at the end?
Well, yes, I'll tell you a little a dirty secret about Sun Valley's. The way that they asked that question changed slightly. They asked, does the benefits of the visitor economy rather than tourism? They used a different word or set of words. So visitor economy, I think, was the reason why in Sun Valley they're like, oh yeah, the visitor economy is fine. But if you use that, I mean, there's so many negative connotations with the word tourism. But that's typically the way that question is asked all across the US. So that I think that those data are a little bit skewed there. I don't know if there's anything specific that they're doing. I do know in Moab, though, they did ask that exact that question, and Moab is overrun. I mean, it's just side by sides and people, but the resource protections have gotten a lot better. They've closed down a lot of those dispersed camping sites where people were just leaving a lot of human waste. The county actually outlawed camping within like a 50-mile radius of Moab. So you have to be in a designated site. So they've been able to kind of improve the quality of the resource there. And it's very fragile, of course, right? Because it's pretty much a desert resource down there. So, but they're still being very much overrun by visitors down there.
So now I understand about that. But are there areas that are where the residents feel better than we do in Jackson?
Oh, yeah.
So I know it's Sun Valley.
Yeah, Sun Valley. I think it's the way they asked the question. I'd have to look at that. Nationally, I think it's actually like 56%. Well, we did another resident sentiment survey over in Fremont County. Residents love visitors over in Fremont County. So Fremont County is like Lander, all the way up to DuBois is a little bit more ornery about it. The Lander is totally fine. Riverton is totally fine. They're like, yeah, well, send your visitors over here. That residents over there were actually way more welcoming. I can't remember they were saying that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks by more like 60-something%, which is higher than the national average, which I think is like 52% or something. So yeah, well,
yeah. I wonder if you could correct for average.
Oh, yeah.
Let's end on that.
Yeah.
8:30.
Okay. Yeah.
But Dan did a really great job.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.